Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Bertram. I'm the Senior Director of Applied Neuroscience at Exos. And I'm here to talk to you today about what I think is maybe one of, or if not the most important topics when it comes to human performance. And that's the topic of sleep. Now, whenever I speak with athletes or people in the corporate space or just everyday folks, I will often tell them that there has never been a more potent performance enhancing drug created in history than sleep when it's done properly. And on the other side of that coin, I will also tell them that there's nothing that will be more detrimental to performance than sleep when it's done poorly. It really is this incredible tool that we have access to every single day, and it touches literally every single system in the body. And when I say that it is the most important performance enhancing tool that has ever been created, I mean that very, very specifically across physical performance, mental performance, cognitive performance, and emotional regulation. These things touch all aspects of human existence and very specifically human performance. So we're going to go through this today, and we're going to talk about what sleep is. We're going to talk about what sleep is not. We're going to talk about tools and strategies for better sleep. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll walk away with a bit more of an understanding of what sleep is really all about, and with some really actionable tools and strategies, like I said, to help us get more sleep each and every night, more and better sleep each and every night. So we'll start with this kind of funny quote here. Sleep is good for you, said every mom everywhere. Of course, this is something that we've all been told for most of our lives, that we need to have good sleep and get a good night's sleep, right? But it's amazing in the past maybe 15 or 20 years what we've learned about sleep and what is happening when we close our eyes at night. And then we've also learned a tremendous amount about what happens when we don't get that good quality and quantity of sleep. And so again, what we're going to try to do here is go beyond just this vague concept that sleep is it's good for us, right? But, I want to really dig into some of the background and understanding of what sleep actually is when we, all the stages that we go through when we close our eyes at night, and what happens throughout the course of an evening, what drives that process at sort of a neurochemical level. And then again, we'll circle back towards the end with some of those actionable tools and strategies. Before we get into that, I just want to maybe make a call out about the history of sleep, okay? So I want to talk first about the fact that our sleep system, our ability in our brain and our body to shut off at the end of the day, this system that we have evolved over literally millions of years, 99% or even more than that of our human history was spent outdoors, right? That in that world, in that outdoor environment, is where our sleep system evolved, right? So in all of the signals that were there to help drive sleep and then in the day drive wakefulness were all present for us in the outdoor natural world. There was sunrise, there was sunset. As the sun sets at night, the world gets quiet, it gets a bit cold, or it cools off a little bit anyways, depending on where you live. And in that environment, right, that is where our sleep machinery really was developed. And we've radically changed the world, especially in the last 100 years. So for example, in the 1920s, the average amount of sleep was about 9.3 hours per night across North America. Today, it is about 6.3. That's the average amount of sleep that people get in one night here in North America. In most places, especially developing countries or developed countries around the world, I should say. And so in about 100 years, in 1 century of really modern civilization, we have managed to shave about 1 full third off of a system that, again, took millions of years to evolve. So, you think about, well, why that is, right? Certainly, in, modern society, sleep has a bit of a stigma attached to it. There's this idea, especially in the hustle culture, that, if you're sleeping too much, if you're oversleeping, you're a bit lazy, and there's the 5 a.m. club and all these other things, right? That's a part of it. But the other part of it is just the fact that we have transitioned so much of our life in the past 100 years indoors. And so the other number that's on the screen here is that 93% of our lives, this is the average now in North America, 93% of our lives are spent indoors, right? That's an average. So, frankly, a lot of us are spending a lot more of our days inside. And so we've moved into these environments where we've got artificial light, and we've got artificial temperature control, right? And we've got things and devices and technology that are creating noise indoors in the evening, again, away from that natural world where things would get dark, quiet, and cool in the evening. And so that's a basic starting point around the history of sleep, just to shine a bit of a light on how much things have really changed, okay? Now, next thing I want to talk about is what sleep is. So, we've all heard about, there's dream sleep and there's this thing called non-REM sleep. I want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the architecture of sleep. So what happens when we close our eyes at night? And this is a really, really stable system. This is true across the board for human beings, okay? Sleep is not a single thing. It is not one thing that happens, but it's actually two rather separate and distinct events or states of consciousness. In other words, there are two types of sleep. There is non-REM sleep, and then there is REM sleep, or that rapid eye movement sleep that often gets affiliated with dream sleep. We actually dream across all types of sleep, but the types of dreams that we tend to remember in the morning and the ones that are really vivid to us tend to happen during that REM sleep. But just so you know, there's a bit of dreaming that goes on across the board. So let's start with what happens when you get into bed at night and you close your eyes, okay? So the first thing that happens, and again, this is really stable across the human existence. The first thing that happens is that we drop into this thing called non-REM sleep. And non-REM sleep is not just one thing. It's actually comprised, as you can see here on the slide, of 4 different stages. And those stages are associated with depth of sleep, okay? So when you first fall asleep at night, you go into stage 1 of non-REM sleep. This is a very light sleep, right? This is where a little creak in the floor can easily wake you up, or if there's a sound outside, you can be awakened very easily when you're in stage 1 of non-REM. The same is true really for stage 2. So stage 2 is a bit deeper, so you've drifted a little bit deeper into sleep, but it's still considered to be light sleep. Now, the thing that happens next is that you start to go into these stages of 3 and 4 of non-REM sleep. This is very specifically defined as deep sleep. So if you happen to have any sort of a wearable device that tracks your sleep and you get a number that says this is how much deep sleep you got, it is referring very specifically to these stages 3 and 4 of non-REM sleep. Then that whole thing, by the way, takes about an hour, and then you bump over into REM sleep. Now, so REM sleep, again, is this thing that we associate commonly with dream sleep. That process takes about a half an hour, and then the whole thing starts over again. So this is the overall structure of a sleep cycle, which takes about 90 minutes. It's part of something called an ultradian rhythm, which are these, less than a day, and in this case, about a 90-minute cycle of sleep. And then this just repeats all night long, or at least as many times as you give yourself an opportunity throughout the course of a sleep. Now, understanding a little bit more about the sleep architecture. So I want to talk about, why these things matter. First of all, I will say that there's absolutely no guarantee that you're going to get much of either one of these really critical parts of sleep. So there are all sorts of variables that can affect these different stages of sleep and how much of each of them you're going to get. And we'll get to that, and we'll break down sort of what happens when you are, deprived of certain types or certain areas of the sleep cycle. But first, I just want to sort of draw out some general ideas about why each of these stages of the sleep cycle are really important. So, first of all, we'll talk about non-REM sleep, or specifically that deep sleep, stages 3 and 4 specifically. Why does that matter? Well, a couple of things we know that happen in stages 3 and 4 of deep non-REM sleep is that there are very critical things that happen then and only then. So for example, we know that this is a really important time for repair of body tissues. And this really happens by a few mechanisms, but one of the key ones is that there is growth hormone released during deep sleep. Now, growth hormone, you might know, it's associated with muscle building and all sorts of different, physiological, enhancements that you can have as a result of training. But really at a more basic level, growth hormone is what is serving to help repair tissues in the body, right? That's true if you happen to have a hard workout. It will help repair muscular tissue, but it's also working across the entire system. So your heart and lungs and your blood vessels, everything is undergoing wear and tear throughout the course of everyday life, right? And that need for repair and the specific neurochemicals that show up to help drive that repair, specifically in this case, growth hormone, shows up only when we get into this deep non-REM sleep. So that's really, really critical, right? There's another thing that happens at the level of the brain, and this is really important for cognitive health and repair. There is a bathing of the brain in cerebrospinal fluid that happens, again, in deep sleep and only in deep sleep. So it is if every night there is a washing of the brain. Now, why does that happen? Why do we need that? Well, there's a great book on this, and a lot of what we're talking about here comes from this book called Why We Sleep. It's by Matthew Walker. It's terrific. If you want a deep dive on any of this, I highly recommend that book. But what he points out here is that, every night, every day when we're walking around and using our brain all day, every day, which we all do, there are waste products that are accumulating in the brain, right? And there's all these different things that show up and just sort of start to build up as, metabolites and waste products of everyday waking life. And every night when we get into deep sleep, cerebrospinal fluid just coats the brain and wipes us clear of the day's waste products. That is a really, really important thing that happens to us in deep sleep, so much so that these days, the leaders in the field of Alzheimer's and different types of dementia have shown some really startling and frightening, frankly, links between Alzheimer's, again, and different types of dementia associated with long-term chronic sleep issues. So this is a really important element of sleep for our cognitive well-being, both in the short term and over the long course of our living existence. So those are two things. And then there's another thing that happens during deep sleep that's really critical here, and it relates to learning. And so when I say that, every day when we're trying to get better at things, we're trying to improve our skills, we're trying to learn new concepts, whatever it is, when we are awake, the brain is basically highlighted. The areas of our brain that we're utilizing when we're trying to learn something new are kind of highlighted when we're awake. But the real consolidation of new information, whether that be cognitive information or motor information, really happens when we are in deep sleep and to a certain extent REM sleep as well. But these two areas of sleep are really, really important. And if you're not getting enough of sleep in either of these two parts of the sleep cycle, you're really compromising your ability to retain new information, which is, of course, really important for all of us, right? So that's what happens in those stages 3 and 4 of deep non-REM sleep that are really critical to this conversation. Let's bump over and talk a little bit about REM sleep and why that specifically matters. I mentioned a minute ago that learning is a big part of what's going on in deep sleep, but there's a different type of learning that seems to be relying heavily on REM sleep. And this is when we talk about connecting new ideas, right? So there's like the part of learning which is just memorizing facts, or we might call that rote memory. That is more reserved for deep sleep. But when we get into REM sleep, this is where we start to associate new ideas with the existing database that we have in our brains, right? We've got some new concept that we're trying to incorporate into our existing worldview. That sort of work, it seems, very much hinges upon REM sleep. And you think about that, it's fascinating. You think about what a dream is. And there's this time where, when you try to tell somebody about a dream that you've had the night before, there's this, there might be one random event that happens, and then, another random event happens, and your brain sort of weaves this narrative between these two seemingly unrelated ideas. And while you're in dream sleep, it all seems to make perfect sense to you. There's no resistance to connecting far-flung ideas when you're in dream sleep. And what an interesting thing it is to me that seems to be the time when learning of these new concepts seems to happen too, where we sort of break down the barriers between resisting, connections and far-flung ideas. And so we wake up in the morning now with a new knowledge base. And really, I think you could think of this as the birthplace of wisdom, where we're starting to grow this conceptual knowledge over time. So that's a really important part of what happens there. Another part that's really important in REM sleep is this idea of emotional regulation. This is really, really critical, right? We think about, stressful world that we all live in, right? There's always, emotional things that are happening to us every day. If we had to carry the weight of that emotion every day cumulatively, and a lot of us do more of this than is probably healthy, it really starts to stack up on us, and it builds up this cognitive load and this mental fatigue and this emotional overwhelm. Well, REM sleep is a fascinating time when it comes to emotional regulation. And here's what I mean by this. Here's how they do this research, if you're curious. So if I was to say to you, before you go to bed tonight, I'm going to show you a series of really disturbing images or videos, right? Just before you're ready for bed. And then we sent you off to sleep. And as you were sleeping, we disturbed you just a little bit every time your brain flicked over into the REM part of the cycle. You don't even have to be awakened by this. We just bump you out of REM sleep. And you can detect this by monitoring the brain and other things. So you go through an entire night's sleep, might feel normal to you in the morning, and you wake up, but you haven't actually had any REM sleep. Now, here's what we'll do. We'll ask you, remember those pictures or videos that we showed you the night before? On a scale of 1 to 10, how disturbing or emotionally charged would you rate those pictures or videos? And when you haven't had REM sleep, you will reliably rate those as statistically more agitating than you will on nights where you have REM sleep. And so there's this expression that, time heals all wounds, as again, Matthew Walker points out and is quite famous for saying, it's actually time spent in REM sleep that is healing these emotional wounds. And so when we get good REM sleep, we can wake up the next day and we'll still have the memories of what happened the day before or the week before, but we've removed some of the emotional baggage that comes along with it. And so we're better able to cope the next day. So the point I'm trying to make here is that both parts of the sleep cycle are really, really critical, but for very different reasons. Now, I mentioned this before, but I just want to cover it again quickly. So all of these cycles of sleep, right? They execute in these 90-minute ultradian rhythms. So again, early on in this, when you first go to sleep at night, you have more deep sleep, right? So, if you fall asleep at night in the 90-minute cycle, the first cycle is going to be dominated quite heavily by REM or by non-REM sleep and some of that deep sleep. But as you get closer to the morning, the ratio of REM to non-REM actually starts to flip. And so that by morning, you're having a disproportionate amount of each cycle being geared towards REM sleep. And so if you tend to notice when you sleep in a little bit later, or when you're starting to wake up in the morning, you tend to remember dreams. It feels like, and you might notice this now that this has been raised, the awareness around this has been raised, you'll start to notice that, as you get further into the night's sleep and as you get closer to the morning, you're actually going to be dreaming a lot more, at least having more REM sleep. Whether or not you recall those dreams is a different subject. So again, just in terms of high level here, sleep cycles last about 90 minutes. We get about 3 to 5 per night, depending again on how much of a sleep opportunity you're giving yourself each night. Early in the night, sleep is biased towards deep sleep or non-REM sleep, and then the opposite is true in the morning. As we get closer to the morning, you're getting a disproportionate amount of REM sleep. Now, if you go back to that quote from everybody's mom everywhere, that a good night's sleep matters, I think what generally people are thinking about there is getting that 8 hours. And certainly that's true. Getting, more sleep does matter. And we'll talk about why that matters specifically. But I want to just drop and, highlight something important here, that it's not just about the quantity of sleep that you get. And I can give you an example. Like this slide here shows some data from an Oura ring, which tracks, again, how much sleep you're getting overall and how much sleep you're getting at various stages of sleep. And these are two different sleeps. So the one on the left side of the screen, it shows here that the total amount of sleep is 8 hours and 15 minutes, which seems like, to me, that would be a great night's sleep, getting 8 hours and 15 minutes. On the right side, you can see that this is a second sleep. Now, this is an even longer sleep, so it's 8 hours and 50 minutes. So to me, on the surface, these both look like really good sleeps. And I think if we've all woke up and said, yeah, I slept for 8 hours last night, you're doing really well. But here's the thing, if you drill down into the data, and again, this is one of the great things about some of these wearable devices that we can just have on us every single night. We can learn a lot about what's going on there, what's happening and what's not happening. So if you look at the sleep on the left side, where there's 8 hours and 15 minutes total, on this particular night, you'll see that the light sleep was 6 hours and 33 minutes. So a vastly disproportionate amount of that entire night's sleep was only spent in those two light stages of non-REM. By contrast, you can see that there was only 9% of sleep that was spent in REM, or 46 minutes, and then 55 minutes, or 11%, spent in deep sleep. Just to give you some idea of what the recommendations are, people these days suggest that, getting more than 7 as a total amount is kind of like the bare minimum that we should be striving for. But within that, you should be looking to get maybe 25% of your total sleep in REM sleep and 25% of your sleep in deep sleep. So on the left, you can see that even though there was a very nice quantity of sleep, the quality of sleep was not great. And so again, there's going to be a carryover effect of that in the morning. So you're going to wake up and you might not feel rested. You might not feel well recovered. You might feel a little bit more emotionally volatile, right? As compared to the sleep on the right side now. So we've got 8 hours and 50 minutes, but here we've got a full hour and 42 minutes of REM sleep. So we're at 19%. So we're still maybe a little bit short of that 25% goal, but certainly a lot better. And here we've got an hour and 36 minutes of deep sleep, so about 18%. So again, not quite where you might want to be, but certainly is a lot different. So we've had more time for repair and regeneration. We've had more time for learning and consolidation of new skills and concepts. And we've had more time to manage and sort of offload some of the emotional baggage of the previous day's experiences. So big picture here, quantity matters, absolutely. But when you start drilling down into the actual data, you can see that sleep goes much beyond just the quantity that you're getting. So we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to really get into now why we should care about this information, right? By the way, I will just say this. I'm going to tell you some things now about why these stages of sleep really matter beyond the conversation that we've had so far. And some of this information is going to frankly be a little bit disturbing, right? Like what happens to us when we don't get enough sleep, right? What I don't want to be doing here is getting people worked up about, oh my gosh, if I don't get enough sleep, I'm going to have all of these physical and cognitive and emotional things happen to me that are going to really set me up, on the back foot every day. That's not the point of this. We're going to get into later how we can overcome some of these things and really get into the tools and strategies. But before we do that, I just want to make some really important points here why this really matters to every single person, whether you're an athlete, whether you're, working every day, or whether you're just, an everyday person trying to optimize their, everyday existence. These things are super critical. So to begin this conversation about why we should care, I want to talk about the most important, perhaps, but certainly the largest sleep study that has ever been conducted. And you might be a perhaps unwilling participant in this study yourself, depending on what part of the world you live in. So every year, you know that if you live in most parts of North America and many parts around the world, that we go through this thing called daylight savings time every spring, right? We spring the clocks ahead forward in March, and then we drop them back again in the fall, right? And so what happens there when we do that, especially in the spring, when we're springing the clocks forward and we're essentially depriving everybody of 1 hour of sleep opportunity, right? So what happens here? First of all, this is a study, again, that nobody signed up for or consented to, that has been going on for decades, and there are literally millions of people in the sample. This is a very robust data set, okay? And people have actually been tracking what happens, what are the impacts on the human system as a result of this really seemingly small disruption, or even potential disruption in a night's sleep. We're talking about 1 hour, right? And it usually happens on a Saturday, so that, you've got Sunday to kind of recover from this, alteration in sleep patterns. And it's fascinating what happens. So one of the things that we now know, if you look at the Monday after daylight savings time, again, millions of samples going back decades, what you find is that there's about an 18% increase in car accidents every single year and in every single place that uses daylight savings time on the Monday, right? And there's about a 6% increase in fatal car crashes on top of that. That is one piece of the puzzle, but you go into this a little bit further. You look at emergency room visits. There's a 24% spike on the Monday, again, every year and in every place that does this, and only in those places, a 24% spike in people showing up in emergency rooms with heart issues, heart attacks, angina attacks, serious enough that they're showing up in emergency rooms. Again, it happens every year and only in the places that change the clocks forward in the spring. There's also, if you're curious, about an 8% increase in the incidence of stroke on that same day. By the way, these data don't normalize until Wednesday of the week. So that 1 hour disruption that we face on the Saturday night has a marked and profound effect on our cognitive abilities, right? That's showing up in car accidents, that's decision making and reaction time. But it's also having a huge toll on our physical well-being, specifically our cardiovascular system, which shows up in heart attacks and in strokes. So again, this is really, really profound. And if you want even more, if that's not convincing enough, let's look at the fall. When the clocks go the other way, you see all of these numbers go in the other direction. So everything changes in the positive when we have an hour of sleep opportunity added to our nightly sleep. And so, again, I say all of these things to make the point that, I think as a society, we vastly underestimate the impact that sleep can have. Specifically, that's 1 day, 1 hour. So you ask yourself, what is the impact of this over the long haul, over days, weeks, months, and years? Not necessarily the most encouraging of physical, cognitive, and emotional signs here. So why do you care? I'm getting into this a little bit more. So, when it comes to physical performance and recovery, sleep is absolutely your best friend. So when we talked about this a little bit earlier, we talked about how deep non-REM sleep is a critical time for release of growth hormone, which is going to help us recover and repair and, heal us up from the day's damage that we inflict upon ourselves as just an artifact of being alive and manipulating ourselves through the world every day. And if you're working out or you're working hard every day, we need that repair even more, right? So that's a really important piece of this. But in terms of specifics in the physical realm, there are some amazing studies that show if you take somebody who normally sleeps around 8 hours in a night, and then for one night you deprive them of that and you maybe take them down to about 5 hours of sleep, and then you put them on a treadmill and you have them pedal to exhaustion, what you'll find is that people tend to tap out at about 15% below what their normal capacity is. So depriving somebody of sleep has a direct impact on how much physical exertion you're going to be able to get out of yourself each and every day. So that's a really important consideration, right, when it comes to athletes or people who are just training for their everyday health. Depriving yourself of sleep, even for one night, is going to show up when you go to try to exert yourself the next day. So obviously that's an important consideration for a lot of us. In terms of cognitive performance now, so we talked a little bit about how when you're in those stages 3 and 4 of deep non-REM sleep, you've got that time for that power washing of all the day's debris on the brain. That really matters, right? So this is what shows up in those car accidents every day, or on daylight savings time, decision making, reaction time. All of the cognitive benefits of sleep are super critical, right? And then again, emotional regulation. So when we miss out on specifically that REM sleep, you're going to find that you're going to be carrying over some of the leftover emotional baggage into your day. And that's going to be an issue. But beyond that, some other things that happen in the brain when we are short slept for even one night is that we find that there's decreased activity in the frontal lobe of your brain, which is the part that really manages our executive function. So your cognitive decision making and problem solving and logic. That part of your brain decreases in activity when you're short slept. But the other part of your brain that seems to get hyperactive is your limbic system or your emotional system. So now you've brought forth perhaps yesterday's emotional baggage, and now your brain is just less capable of helping you navigate through emotionally tricky times throughout the day, right? Your frontal lobes that usually step in to say, okay, well, I can just override that impulse that's coming from my emotional system. But now you've kind of got the double whammy of the hyperactive emotional system and the hypoactive frontal lobes, all setting you up to be a more emotionally charged, which again shows up in reactivity, poor decision making, and all of the other things that come along with this. So 3 really important reasons there to be paying attention to sleep. So again, trying not to frighten everybody or freak everybody out about what they could potentially be inflicting upon themselves. If you're in that category that, the average again is about 6.3 hours a night, or maybe you're less than that. Here's the good news. Because of all of this, all of the advances in our understanding of our sleep architecture and what's actually happening inside the brain and the body during sleep, it's really allowed us to help target certain strategies and tools and mechanisms that can help us win back sleep. So here's where I want to take this conversation in a positive direction and talk about things that we can absolutely do to change our relationship with sleep, our ability to find sleep, to sleep longer, and to get better quality of sleep. So I'm going to walk through a few of these and hopefully put a more positive spin on sleep for everyone. So where do we start? So I want to start this conversation about what we can do by thinking about a really important concept, first of all, that came from a Stanford professor named Carol Dweck, and she wrote a book called Mindset. And what she did was she drew a distinction between, people's basic belief systems and assumptions that they have about themselves and maybe other people in the world, right? And there's this spectrum of beliefs where at one end of the spectrum you have a very fixed mindset, potentially, where you believe that I am who I am, and that's fixed, and my who I show up with every day, that's a fixed trait, And beyond that, I'm not looking to push myself. I'm not looking to challenge myself. I don't enjoy failing because I see that as a threat to my ego, right? That's the fixed mindset category. And on the other end of that spectrum, there's the growth mindset, which tends to adopt more of a posture of, okay, well, challenges are good. I like challenges because that gives me an opportunity to find solutions. And I know that through challenge and through struggle, I'm going to grow and I'm going to develop and I'm going to learn new things, right? And sure, maybe I'll fail in that through that struggle, but I know that even there, through failure, there is an opportunity to learn. And so all of us show up somewhere on that spectrum. And the reason I bring that up within the context of sleep is that, I run into a lot of people who just kind of say, you know what, I just can't sleep. It's just, I wake up every morning, I wake up 3 times in the night, or, I'm working shift work, or, I'm traveling, or, I'm just not a good sleeper, right? That's a very fixed mindset when it comes to sleep. And there's absolutely no reason to have that. Because as we're going to talk about here, sleep is actually a skill that is trainable. And through these tools and strategies that we're going to talk about, you can markedly and significantly increase your ability to find sleep, to stay asleep, and to have good quality sleep. So, but at the front end, just approaching this with that open mind, with that growth mindset, I think is an important first step for us. So what are the strategies? And I want to start with one that is probably the most important here, which is starting with consistency. Where we put the brackets around our sleep opportunity are really, really important. If you've ever experienced jet lag, where you have a sudden disruption to this thing called your circadian clock, you know what this feels like, right? If you travel even a couple of time zones, you're going to feel like you're dragging a little bit. And certainly if you travel, overseas and now you're 7, 8, 10 hours difference, you know how that feels. You feel, drained physically, you feel unsharp mentally, and you feel a little bit more emotionally volatile, right? That is very much the result of having a change in the consistency of your sleep. And, if you even think back to those data we were talking about a few minutes ago with daylight savings time, even that 1 hour of consistency change can have some pretty drastic implications for our system as a whole. So starting with this idea that getting to sleep and waking up at approximately the same time every day is a really critical skill that we can all lean into. And I'm not talking about how, it has to be within 10 minutes. Like, you don't have to go to bed within 10 minutes every single night. If you're thinking about, even say an hour for starters, try to get to bed, maybe between, 10 and 11 at night. That's still a consistent enough window that over time will start to show up and have some positive effects. And then maybe getting up, anywhere 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there. But being mindful that consistency is really, really important here is an important lesson. And I'm going to talk about something that can really help you here with this idea of consistency. So one is just recognizing that it matters, right? Raising some awareness about what happens when we don't have consistent sleep. That's part of it. But what I want to talk about is giving you a real strategy here. And one of the things that is really important at the front of this discussion is making sure that you have your biology working for you and not against you. And I'm going to talk about something here called your circadian clock. And I want to just be really clear. When I use that term, I'm not talking about some, ethereal concept that doesn't have any, real biological structure behind it. This absolutely does. There is a part of your brain, it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you're curious, that is the home of your circadian clock. And it operates on this 24-hour rhythm, right? So we wake up in the morning because of certain neurochemicals that are released. They drive us through, raise alertness throughout the day. And then at night, we tend to get sleepy because of new neurochemicals that come onto the scene. And then the next day, the whole cycle repeats again. These are circadian rhythms, or about a day. Now, here's the thing about this. We know that we can have some real impact on being able to reset our circadian rhythms. And again, it all has to do with the signals that we're putting into our brain each and every day. And out of all of them around, cold and sound and these other things, light now is the really important driver, right? Most of the signals for sleep enter the brain through the eyes by way of light. You have light receiving cells in your eyes that tell your brain what is happening in the world in terms of light and dark. And we can use that as a tool to help us get our biology working for us. And here's the practice. Basically, it involves getting outside in the morning for anywhere between 2 to 10 minutes and observing natural light. If you can do this within about an hour of your wake-up time, what you will do is two really important things. You will encourage the healthy release of cortisol, right? Cortisol gets a bad rap. It's sort of associated as a stress hormone, but cortisol is absolutely essential. It is what wakes us up in the morning and drives alertness. You want a healthy cortisol release in the morning. And the signal for that largely comes from natural light. So when you wake up in the morning, and by the way, it's much more effective, anywhere between 50 to 100 times more effective if you go outside and get on the other side of the glass. It's amazing how much just everyday window glass will filter out light. So if you get outside and you just look towards, the east in the morning and you see that nice sort of sunrise, it doesn't have to be right at sunrise, but just any time around there's this nice sort of blue-yellow spectrum to the light. That is the signal that drives wakefulness. Again, blue light is one of these things that has a very bad rap these days. But blue light is exactly what your brain needs in the morning. It is associated with sunrise. And that gives our brain a signal to get cortisol on the scene, help us feel alert and awake in the morning. But it also does one other thing, is that it starts a countdown in your brain. For about 12 hours later, you will start to release melatonin. And melatonin is that chemical that helps to drive us towards sleepiness, and it times the onset of our sleep, right? So when we see and we get exposed to natural light in the morning, you're going to drive wakefulness, but you're going to start the countdown. So about 12 hours after you get that light exposure, your natural sleep hormones start to come on the scene, and that'll help move you towards sleep. So 2 to 10 minutes is all this takes in the morning. You can do this just by walking outside. If it's cloudier, maybe, get, closer to 10. If you live in a part of the world where there's a lot of sun, really 2 minutes is all it takes. You can back that up, by the way, by getting a second dose of natural light around sunset. Because at sunset, the spectrum of the light has changed. It's a bit more reddish. Again, it sends a second signal to your brain that the day is almost over, and it reinforces the release of melatonin. And that is going to take you closer to sleep and help time your sleep. If you do this every day, you can help reset your circadian clock at a remarkably fast pace. Even if you're shift working or you're traveling, you can triple the switch over. So normally when you travel, let's say, they talk about how for every time zone, it takes about a day to recover from that one time zone shift. Doing this practice, they've shown that you can expedite that process by about 3 times. So you can reset to 3 time zones away in one day of doing this practice. So 2 to 10 minutes in the morning within an hour of sleep. Try to get out and see a little bit more of that natural sunlight around sunset. And then maybe most critical, absolutely avoid any kind of bright light between about 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. This can have a massive disruption on the circadian clock and have some very negative downstream influences. So this is, for anyone out there who's in the habit of having their cell phone next to the bed or working from their laptop in bed, waking up in the middle of the night and checking their phone, these are really the worst things you can do for sleep. So we want light at certain points of the day, but we absolutely have to cut out, especially that bright light in those critical, morning hours between late night and early morning hours. So pay attention to those times very specifically, okay? Now, what else can we do? So now we've got the mindset dialed in. We're going to take this as a challenge and believe that we can improve our sleep. We're going to get our biology working for us and get that circadian clock really dialed in, right? So the sleep system is working for us and our wakefulness system is working for us. So we're feeling more alert every day. What else can we do, right? What else can we do within the environmental factors to help us, sleep a little bit more effectively every night? And again, we're going to start with light. So the first light conversation we had, which is around, getting exposure to natural light is really, really important, and avoiding light at certain times of like the middle of the night. But beyond that, there are things we can do to help encourage a healthy transition towards sleep late in the day. So it doesn't just have to do with your screens, right? As I said, in the last 100 years, we've moved indoors and we've got all these artificial lights around. When you stop to pay attention to how much light, have a look around in your house tonight, around 8 o'clock or whenever the sun starts to go down where you live, how many artificial lights are on in your house, whether that be the TV or just overhead lights. All of these different sources of light are telling our brains that it's not actually nighttime. And it's actually dampening the release of melatonin, right? All these natural or artificial light signals are confusing your brain, where it's thinking that, I'm supposed to be releasing melatonin right now, but I'm getting these contradictory signals in the form of light that are going to dampen your release and your timing of melatonin. So trying your best to dim some lights around the house. Whenever it starts to get dark, just go around and start dimming lights or turning off unnecessary lights can certainly be a huge boost here. And then there's some other useful things you can do, like investing in a pair of really good blinds is maybe some of the best money that I've ever spent to just block out, that morning light and try to do whatever you can to just protect your sleep environment from light that can show up at any time of the night, but specifically in the morning. You want to try to block out as much of that as you can. Again, as we said previously, getting electronics, TVs, and phones and any kind of screen away from your eyes, particularly after 10 and 11 o'clock at night, super critical. If you can't do any of that, there are some really great eye masks out there. And if you're a fan of eye masks, they're a really useful strategy, especially when, if you're traveling, let's say, and you've got a nice protected environment at home, but you go somewhere else and maybe you don't have that. Sleep masks are nice. They're portable. You can take them anywhere with you, and they can really help with sleep. There's some really good data on that. So again, light, super important signal that we want to use to our advantage at certain times of the day, and then get out of our eyes at other times of the day. Second thing is around noise, and the idea, again, that, our sleep system evolved in a world that got dark, quiet, and cold in the evening. We live in environments now where we have all this artificial sound coming out of our stereos or our TVs or our computers or whatever it is in the evening. This can also be really disruptive, right? So quieting the house down at night, and then when you get into bed, I know that, depending on where you live, there can be a lot of ambient noise in the world around your house or your apartment, right? And that's hard to control. So a strategy that we talked about here is just finding a white noise device. There are commercially available white noise devices that can really help just give you that consistent hum of noise that can be very beneficial to help you drift off into sleep and to stop you from those unexpected noises that can happen randomly depending on where you live. Even just having a fan, that's what I use. I have a fan in my bedroom. It has a nice purr throughout the night, and it helps to muffle out sort of those random noises that can occur. Very, very effective strategies to help you maintain sleep and good quality sleep. Another one really important here is temperature. So first of all, it's important to know that your body temperature is really inconsistent throughout the day. You hear about, 98.6 degrees. That's kind of an average number, but there are temperature fluctuations all day, every day. And specifically when you're sleeping, like your body temperature wants to be in a cool, your body wants to be in a cool environment when you go to sleep. Everybody probably knows this. It's a lot easier to fall asleep when it's a little bit too cool than when it's too hot, right? So knowing that, paying attention to what the the room temperature is when you go to sleep is a really important consideration. So going around the house, just thinking about maybe turning the thermostat down a little bit. If you're like me, I live in a household where, my wife likes to have the room more sort of warmer in the evening. I'm trying to convince her that, having a cooler environment is the way to go. So we've kind of solved this one by just having, better blankets on half of the bed so that she can feel like she's getting, the warmth that she needs, and I feel like I'm getting the cool that my body needs. But generally, I tend to run a little bit hotter too. There's all kinds of individual differences here to pay attention to. But as a rule, you will drift into better sleep if you are cooling your body temperature in the evening. And you can do that by turning down, the thermostat, or opening a window if you live in a place with cool air outside, or even taking a hot shower right before bed. That seems a bit contradictory, right? You think you're heating up your body. Well, what happens when you get out of a hot shower is your body just starts dumping heat, and your skin is flushed because it's trying to give off heat, but your core temperature is actually coming down. So that can be a very useful strategy for sleep too. So getting rid of light, getting rid of sound, and cooling off your environment are going to be really big helps for you when it comes to good quality and quantity of sleep. A couple of last things I want to go through, and these are around lifestyle factors of sleep, okay? So alcohol. I'm never going to be super puritanical about this. I think there are plenty of ways to, I think, have healthy relationships with alcohol, and we're not talking about giving anything up here. So this is just about how to think about alcohol consumption and sleep, because what we know now is that alcohol can have a very disruptive effect on the sleep system. So, you think about, if you have a drink, sometimes people think, well, that helped put me to sleep, right? Well, it's true that sleep at the start can have sort of this depressing influence on the nervous system and help us sort of drift towards sleep. The problem is when your body starts metabolizing alcohol, it actually becomes more of a stimulant, and it starts to disrupt the quality of your sleep. And where it specifically targets, it seems, is your REM sleep. So if you drink alcohol too close to bed, your sleep quality is going to be affected, but more often than not, it's your REM sleep that's taking a bit of a hit here. And this is an important thing to think about because, a lot of people, maybe have a drink at the end of the day to unwind and try to disconnect from the stresses of the day. And again, in wakeful states, that is true. Like, it can help you disconnect, but really what it's doing is hampering your ability over the long haul to manage the emotional baggage of everyday living, because it's targeting the very part of sleep that's designed to help you in a really therapeutic way manage emotional stress. So if you do like to have a beer or a glass of wine or whatever, the recommendation is to try to make sure that you don't have that within about 2 to 3 hours of going to bed, so that your body has time to metabolize the alcohol, and it'll have less of an effect. Everybody's a little bit different here. Everybody metabolizes alcohol at a different rate, but certainly thinking about getting it further away from bedtime is a really good practice. Caffeine, one of my all-time favorite things to consume. I'm a big coffee drinker, and again, never going to tell anybody not to drink coffee, because there are actually some really good health benefits of drinking coffee too. The conversation we're having here is specifically about the interaction between caffeine and sleep. So caffeine is an amazing molecule, right? And it has literally, unlike alcohol, which can be metabolized quite quickly, caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours and a quarter life of about 12 hours, which means that if you have, a coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's still about a quarter of that caffeine circulating in your system at 10 o'clock at night. So you've got a stimulant circulating around in your system when you're trying to get towards sleep. So it has been shown time and time again to have a negative effect on a lot of people's ability to get sleep. And look, I know there are people out there, I used to fall into this camp too, and I would say, it's no big deal. I can have an espresso after dinner and I can fall asleep just fine. That may be true. But what I now know when I look at my own sleep stats every day is that my quality of sleep is very much affected, even if I'm getting a good quantity of sleep. So think about caffeine and how you can maybe think strategically about when and where you want to use caffeine as a stimulant in your life. So again, the advice we give to people, maybe noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, think about cutting off caffeine to give your body at least some time to get rid of the majority of that caffeine, okay? So stress, last thing we're going to talk about in terms of everyday management. Stress is something that we all carry around with us every day, and it can have a huge impact on us and on our sleep, right? That emotional load, that mental, cognitive load that we carry around. The day's stresses, they can show up, right? You get into bed at night and you try to close your eyes, and then all of a sudden the day starts replaying itself, and maybe you fall asleep, but then you're jolted awake in the middle of the night because you're thinking about a deadline or something that happened earlier in the day. These are common problems. Stress and sleep is a serious issue. And there are many ways to tackle this. I've given you a few really simple things to do. Strategy 1, taking 5 minutes to remind yourself of what your upcoming schedule is. So for me, that's just a matter of, at the end of the day, having a look at what my calendar looks like the next day. So when I get into bed at night, I'm not anticipating too much what's coming at me in the morning. Decreasing uncertainty is a really nice way to manage stress. And just by looking at your calendar and reminding yourself what's coming up the next day so that you're not stressing, did I forget something? Is there something coming up that I should have considered? Just doing that every day can have a really useful, benefit on sleep. Taking a few minutes for a guided meditation. There are plenty of commercially available apps out there, Headspace, Calm, Waking Up. There are a bunch of different ones. I cannot sort of highlight the importance of this enough. It's been one of the biggest game changers in my life, using meditation every day just as an awareness practice, but also as a tool to help me unwind at the end of the day, to just close my eyes and focus on my breathing, check out from my everyday existence for a few minutes. It can really help with that transition towards sleep. Likewise, using breathing strategies can also be really beneficial. So what we've got here is do 3 to 5 minutes of a 6-second inhale, a 4-second hold, and then a 10-second exhale. This is called 6-4-10 breathing for obvious reasons, right? And the basic structure of that, if you hadn't noticed, is that the exhale is longer than the inhale. Whenever you have an extended exhalation, you're driving some stimulation into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest mode. It pushes on the sympathetic nervous system, which is your stress signal, right? So by elongating those exhales, what you're doing is you're encouraging the rest and digest. And so all of these things together can be a really nice part of an evening practice, right? Check your schedule, have a look and see what's coming up the next day, get into bed, close your eyes, focus on your breathing, bring awareness to something other than your thoughts. And then maybe if you still haven't quite gotten there, doing some of these breathing techniques to really help encourage your nervous system to down-regulate and help you move closer towards a better sleep. Finally, make your decision, right? So why do we do this? Connecting to your why is a really important part of this. We talked about growth mindset and having that open mind towards sleep. But, when it comes to like driving behavior change and making changes and upgrades into your life, we really are talking about, well, why would you do this? What's your motivation for doing it? And so we just want to, shine a light on a couple of things. You're like, ask yourself some questions about why you should consider taking on better habits around sleep. Well, consider for a minute, if you will, the difference between changing your sleep habits and not doing that. So how hard would it be to adopt some of these research-based practices that we've presented today? Everything in here is backed by really powerful peer-reviewed data. These are strategies that have been shown to be really effective. How hard would it be to adopt these things? Getting out for 2 to 10 minutes in the morning, checking your schedule before bed at night. Not a big lift. So it doesn't seem like, on the surface at least, that these are really taxing in terms of the requirements. But ask yourself, what would be the benefits you could possibly provide to your life? So think of why you would want to do this. Do you want to be more physically capable of getting after it every day? Do you want to be more mentally sharp every day? Do you want to be better able to navigate tricky emotional situations throughout the day, right? These are all critical for performance and just everyday happiness. So think of the benefits. And then ask yourself maybe the question of what would be the cost here of doing nothing? What happens if you don't do this? So just again, to quickly recap the benefits of sleep, it touches literally every element of performance and well-being, right? Helps us with emotional regulation, brain health, heart health, mental focus, physical performance, problem solving, and even willpower. All of these things are obviously and well demonstrated benefits of having good sleep, good quality, good consistency, and good quantity of sleep every night. It literally will positively affect each and every one of these things when it's done correctly. And as I said at the start, it can detrimentally affect each and every one of these things when it's not done well on a consistent night after night basis. So as a takeaway, we want you to feel empowered. We want you to realize that there are elements of sleep that are well within your control. So control what you can control. Upgrade your sleep and upgrade your life. Thanks. I hope you managed to find something useful in this conversation today, and I hope to see you back here real soon.